bring the regular assembly meeting for February 5th, 2024 to order at 7:01 p.m. Mr. Bryson, flag salute. Would you please lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Atkinson, would you please offer the land acknowledgement?
We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunishish.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hale. Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Walal Hida. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
And we're going to check our sound system and make sure it's working. Miss Hughes Candies.
Here.
Okay, thank you. And Miss Wall is not present. Madam Mayor.
Here.
And Acting Mayor Hill.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We actually have two special orders of business, and we'll start with Elizabeth Jolly. Ms. Jolly, will you please come up, and Mr. Smith will read the proclamation. Thank you. Do you want to just stand back?
Sure.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Craig will come around. Thank you.
Okay, I have the special pleasure of doing this. This is a proclamation in recognition of Elizabeth Jajali. Whereas the Regeneron Science Talent Search is the nation's oldest and most prestigious science and math competition for high school seniors, and whereas this year 300 scholars were selected from 2,162 applications from 712 high schools across 46 states, Guam, Puerto Rico, and 10 other countries. Whereas Thunder Mountain High School's Elizabeth Jajali was the only scholar in Alaska selected for this illustrious honor. Whereas as the Regeneron Science Talent Search Scholar, Elizabeth joins a group of distinguished alumni who have gone on to receive more than 100 of the world's most esteemed science and math honors, including 13 Nobel Prizes, 11 National Medals of Science, 2 Fields Medals, 23 MacArthur Foundation Fellowships, and 6 Breakthrough Prizes. Whereas, now more than ever, our world needs more students like Elizabeth to become the next generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators that will develop solutions to our world's greatest challenges. And whereas Elizabeth's hometown of Juneau, Alaska, is extremely proud of her accomplishment. Now therefore, Beth A. Weldon, Mayor of the City and Borough of Juneau, Alaska, on behalf of the City and Borough Assembly, do formally acknowledge and congratulate Elizabeth Jajali for being named a scholar in this year's Regeneron Science Talent Search, the nation's oldest and most distinguished science and math competition for high school seniors. Congratulations.
I will use Mr. Smith's mic. I will read a proclamation for Engineers Week, and I would invite the engineers here to come on up while I read it, and then you get to shake everyone's hands as well. In the audience, I believe we have Bridget Lepenter. I don't know if John Bohan is here yet. And we have several engineers from private companies, Zachary Miller, Hannah Seaman, Dominic McGonigal. My mic stopped working. Thank you. Okay, thank you. John Bohan is here. Thank you for being here. I'll stand over here near you. Whereas February 18th through 2024 has been designated as National Engineers Week. And whereas the 2024 theme, Welcome to the Future, is about celebrating today's achievements and paving the way for a brighter and more diverse future in engineering. And whereas National Engineers Week is celebrated during the week of George Washington's birthday to honor the contributions President Washington, a military engineer and land surveyor, I didn't know that, made to engineering. And whereas Southeast Alaska engineers have enhanced the quality of life in Juneau and the Southeast community through public works projects, ports and harbors development, maritime transportation, mining, and improvements to airports, museums, recreational facilities, roadways, schools, and telecommunications. And whereas the Juneau branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers and Alaska Capital Engineers are local sponsors of National Engineers Week, celebrating the local accomplishment of Projects of the Year and Engineer of the Year recognitions within the Juneau region. And whereas since 1983, the National Society of Professional Engineers has contributed time, sponsorship, and resources in support of the National Math Counts Competition Series, a competitive mathematics program that promotes mathematical achievements through a series of fun and engaging B-style contests. And whereas the 2024 Juneau Math Counts competition will be held on February 10th, 2024 at Floyd Dryden Middle School. And whereas the Juneau branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers engages in hands-on school outreach programs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics during National Engineers Week to inspire future generations of engineers and scientists, one of whom we have here up in the front of the room. And whereas the Juneau branch has established civil engineer and professional engineer scholarships for high school seniors pursuing Bachelor of Science degrees in the engineering and science fields. Now, therefore, I, Michelle Hale, acting mayor of the City and Borough of Juneau, Alaska, on behalf of the City and Borough Assembly, do hereby proclaim February 18th through 24th, 2024 as National Engineers Week in Juneau, Alaska, and call upon the people of Juneau to recognize the essential contributions engineers make within our community. Thank you all so much for what you do, and thank you so much for being here. And you get to make the round and shake everyone's hands. Thanks so much. That's it. You got it. We'll move on to approval of minutes. Mr. Kelly.
Madam Acting Mayor, I move approval of the May 8th Assembly Regular Meeting Draft Minutes, the May 17th, 2023 Special Assembly Draft Minutes, and the December 14th, 2023 special assembly meeting, Barlow Regional Hospital Board and Planning Commission appointments draft minutes, and ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objections, those minutes are approved. We'll move on to requests for agenda changes. Madam Manager, do you have any requests for agenda changes?
No.
Next, we'll move on to public participation on non-agenda items. I have one member of the public on Zoom. That would be Joshua Adams to testify on non-agenda items. And then we'll get the sign-up sheet for members in the room, but we'll start with the member on Zoom. So if Joshua Adams is there, we'll take his first testimony on housing in general.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Just pause for just a sec while we get organized, Mr. Adams. Thank you.
Okay.
So, let's see. Madam Clerk, are we ready? I apologize for that brief interruption. Mr. Adams, on your first item that you're signed up for housing in general, you have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Joshua Adams and I'm a local landlord. I've come here to talk about the housing crisis in Juneau as it relates to Ordinance 2023-14BU. Some folks seem stuck on the idea that just throwing any kind of housing out there is going to create.
Excuse me, Mr. Adams.
Yeah?
Are you speaking to an ordinance that is on our agenda tonight?
Yes, Ordinance 2023-14BU.
Okay, Mr. Adams, I'm sorry. I had you listed 3 times. I had you listed for BU, BV, and housing in general. So if you want to speak on BU, that will be done at the time that ordinance comes up on the agenda.
I guess I could do that, but it's kind of a little bit more general. It was just a tag on that point. I think it is more appropriate to have this, before the meeting.
Mr. Adams, just a moment, please. If you want to speak in general at this part of the meeting, that's fine. But if you want to speak to anything that's on the agenda, it has to happen at that time, at the time that we're considering those items. So if you want to speak generally now, you can do that.
I guess that's up to you. I could wait. I mean, it does refer to that, that specific ordinance, but again, it is kind of around that subject of housing, affordable housing.
Why don't you go ahead and wait and speak on this when we bring that ordinance up?
I defer to your wisdom on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adams. That's what we'll do. Thank you. We'll move on to members of the public in the room. We'll start with Mike Clemens. You have 3 minutes for testimony on non-agenda items. Please push the button so that the mic turns green and state your name and area of town you live in, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Mike Clemens in the Valley. Thank you. The Chinese symbol for crisis includes danger and opportunity. Right now, the school board is presenting a danger to the citizens, but that gives you an opportunity because the assembly has previously just rubber stamped whatever the school board wanted. That's going to change this year. I'm not sure how, but let me suggest something that the school board can't suggest. It's a change in practice, okay? I'm talking about indigenous linguistic reparations. That's a lot of words for saying, give the school district money, but do it independently from their budget process. Give it to a nonprofit, preferably a native nonprofit, that can then contract with the school district so that that $1 million they're spending now on that program doesn't end up competing with other things like auto shop. Now, this is going to take backbone and brinksmanship. It will involve, number one, people deciding on the assembly that they can do something besides just rubber stamp the assembly. Now, it would also mean that you've got to talk to the governor and the Commission of Education because this is a dramatic change. In state government, there was a saying, emergencies are rarely found to exist. But I would suggest that right now we're facing an emergency when our kids are concerned. You don't have to go far. Just read your Costco magazine, Children Experiencing Stress and Anxiety. Now, I've tried to find out more about the school district right now, but it's challenging. The last time I checked 2 years ago, there was about $1 million they're spending on this program. That's fine, but in crunch time, when the school board is doing all kinds of number crunching, mind-numbing exercises, how do the kids come out? I'm suggesting that you need to think about the kids. In any case, you're going to have to bail out the school district. If you bought into this idea, you could basically make the school district whole because they've spent millions in direct and indirect costs on this program and other aspects of their curriculum. So if you want to hear more, invite me to the Finance Committee meeting Wednesday, but I'm not a political operative. I'm just an old guy whose eyes are going out bad and can't, go through the budget details anymore. So if this interests you at all, and if, you're thinking about it, you can talk to me. And since I wrote a letter to the editor, I'm asking you to make good choices. Don't just rubber stamp what the school board says, because they've let this community down big time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. Does any member of the assembly have a question for Mr. Clemens? Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Clemens.
How long was that? I made it? Okay. Do I turn this off?
Next, we have Nancy Waterman for testimony on non-agenda items. Thank you, Ms. Waterman. State your name and area of town you live in, and you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Waterman. I live on Gastineau Avenue, downtown. In January, the Juneau League of Women Voters adopted an update to their avalanche and mass wasting position. It is on their website, junolv.org/advocacy/positions. I've emailed that to you. You'll see it in your email. Brief highlights. There are differences in avalanches and landslide areas. Potential hazard areas exist borough-wide. Studies received by CBJ from avalanche and landslide experts are a valuable baseline for information and decision-making. In order to ensure the safest possible use of properties impacted by potential avalanches and landslides, CBJ should, number one, educate and notify the public regularly. Number two, regulate use of structures and of new buildings. Number three, prevent or reduce existing hazards. And number four, explore remedies for existing situations. Amplifications of these are on the website. The League recognizes the difficulty in determining how best to use areas of Juneau in potential hazard zones, especially when balancing the rights of property owners, the housing supply, insurance challenges, and for public safety, health, and welfare. Please continue your work to educate, regulate, prevent and reduce, and explore remedies as we move forward as a modern, resilient community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waterman. Do any members of the Assembly have any questions for Ms. Waterman? Seeing no questions, thank you for testifying, and thank you for the work that the League put in on that position paper. Appreciate it. Thank you. Next, we have, I'm not sure, Mackin Z. Dave? I'm not sure. Thank you. Mackenzie Dane, thank you. Please. I'm sorry, I really apologize for that. Please state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
My name's Mackenzie Dane. I actually didn't prepare much of anything. I only signed up as some people in my online spheres all supported a ceasefire in Gaza. And I wanted to implore the city and borough of Juneau to do whatever you must to vote for a ceasefire in Gaza against the people of Palestine. This is an incredibly awful thing that's happening. This genocide against the Palestinian people. We must say something, especially as people of indigenous descent around us that know this struggle very intimately. I'm not among you. I am of a colonizer lineage, but we must stand with the people of Gaza in this time of crisis, and we must say something. I have called my representatives. I have spoken up as much as I can in every space, that I can find. I am a very new member of this community, and I don't know that I will be able to stay for long term. But it's important to me as a member of this community now to stand with the people of Juneau in this. Ceasefire now. Free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dane. Are there any questions from members of the Assembly? Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony. Next, we have Sonia Kumar. Please state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Thanks.
Ms. Kumar.
I'm Sonia Kumar, and I live in the Valley. My name is Sonia Kumar, and I'm here representing Juneau for Palestine, who demands a ceasefire in Palestine. We are here to ask that the Juneau Assembly calls for a permanent ceasefire and an end to all U.S. funding in Israel. Nearly 50 United States cities have taken a stand and demanded a ceasefire as government bodies. We're asking that the Juneau Assembly join cities like Eugene, Seattle, Chicago, and Atlanta in standing up for Palestine. As the capital of Alaska, it's our responsibility to set the path for the rest of the state. Earlier today, we provided a draft resolution for you to consider via email. These city resolutions send a message to the federal government to stop funding this genocide. In Juneau, just the money our residents pay in federal taxes has contributed nearly $500,000 to Israel's military. That money pays for some of the missiles and bullets that have been used to kill over 27,000 civilians. And that's nearly equivalent to the population of this town. Can you imagine that? This makes us complicit in this genocide. As a city, Juneau has scarcely begun to address its place in the violent colonization of Alaska, and this is a chance for us to take a stand for Palestinians who have been living and dying through 121 days of genocide. We want to show that Juneau stands against genocide in all forms and in all places. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing Juneau added to a list of cities speaking out in support of Palestine.
Thank you, Ms. Kumar. Do any members of the Assembly have questions for Ms. Kumar? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And that concludes, maybe I'll ask, is there any other testimony on non-agenda items? Two, we see two people. Come on up, the person in the back of the room. Oh, here we go. Jeff Landfield. Oh, sorry about that. Mr. Landfield, please press the mic and state your name and where area of town you live in. So turn the mic on. It's not. There you go. Oh.
Okay, it's on.
Okay.
I'm Jeff
You have
Landfield.
3 minutes.
Thank you. I live on 6th and Franklin. I live in Anchorage, but I come down here for the session. I'm here to talk about snow plowing, but based on the previous testimony, I just want to add there was a ceasefire until October 6th when members of Hamas brutally murdered over 1,000 Israelis. So now I'm here to testify, but a lot of that's incorrect. What they're saying, if there's a genocide, they're doing a pretty bad job at it. People in Palestine and the West Bank and Gaza have greatly increased their populations over the last 70 years. But I'm here to talk about snow plowing. I live in Anchorage, and I'm sure many of you are aware we have a real problem with snow plowing. I've been coming down to Juneau for the last 6 years for the legislative session. I was living at the Driftwood for the last 5 years, but we're no longer welcome there. So not a fan of the Driftwood anymore, but I'm staying at a friend's house. I'm renting a place on 6th and Franklin. And you guys do a great job at snow plowing. Anchorage is bad. I mean, I've lived there for 20 years. There's still cars in the street on my road that have never been towed away. It takes, 3, 4, 5 days to plow the snow. And when it's finally plowed, it's kind of not even really totally plowed. Some of the 4-lane roads are like 3 lanes, so it's really 2 lanes. Some of the 2-lane roads are 1 lane. I'm just amazed. I don't know what you guys are doing here, but the roads are plowed. There's like signs up where you tow the cars away. If they aren't, if they're in the way, they go to Centennial. I don't know where they go, but they get towed away. Everything's plowed. It's just incredible. So if any of you want to come to Anchorage, I mean, on my dime, I'll pay for you to come there and just tell us how to do it like you guys do it, because it wasn't just, and I was curious because maybe it's just downtown. I drove the Glacier Highway. I drove to the valley. Like everything was plowed. I mean, I can't believe it. There's still parts of Anchorage that aren't really even plowed after snowfall, like huge snowfall in December and January. So I'm just here to say thank you for plowing the roads. It's really nice to be in a place where I can drive around and the roads are plowed. It's kind of incredible. So if anybody wants to come to Anchorage, I'll pay for it. Come talk to our assembly, our government, and tell us how to do that, because it's really nice being in a place where the roads are plowed and I can get around, and just sort of say thank you for that.
Mr. Landfield, thank you. And I am sure our manager Kester will pass that thanks on to our staff who are working very, very hard. Are there any questions from members of the Assembly? Seeing none, thank you for your
You guys are
testimony.
doing something right, so pass
Thank
it
you.
on to Anchorage. Thank you.
And we have one more person that's not on the sign-up sheet, but come forward, please, and share your testimony with us. You need to state your name and area of town you live in, and you've got 3 minutes.
Jared Olin. I'm in Juneau, the section downtown. Zenizun, Jared Olin, Uza, Tlego Hutanislan, Natali Dan Hutanislan, Lesto, Tanaka Head Hutga Bezechta Hutanislan. Hi, I'm Jared. I'm Koya Khan. I'm from Galena or Natali Dan, but I live in Zantikihini now, or Juneau. And I'm here to ask you all to call for a ceasefire in Palestine. It's something very important to me as an Indigenous person in Alaska, and I would hope it would be something important to you who control a number of constituents on Indigenous land here, and to hold that power and to have Indigenous interests. You also must care about the Indigenous interests of other places in the world. And if we have a genocide in military doing experimental activity that'll be mirrored here and other places across the world. And so I just implore you all to call for a ceasefire on Abase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olin. And can you spell your name for the record?
Jaredolin.
Thank you, Mr. Olin. Are there any questions from members of the Assembly for Mr. Olin? I see none, so thank you so much for your testimony. So that ends the public participation on non-agenda items. We will move on to the consent agenda. Are there any public requests for consent agenda changes other than ordinances for introduction? Seeing none, are there assembly requests for consent agenda changes? Seeing none, assembly action, Mr. Smith, would you move the consent agenda items H through M?
Very good. Yes, Deputy Mayor Hale, I move the consent agenda items H through M as presented and ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? That is moved and that is moved. Thank you. We'll move on to item M, FY25 legislative capital priorities. I think, oh, that's part of the consent agenda. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item N, public hearing. Madam Clerk, item 14.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Resolution 3051, a resolution petitioning the Alaska State Alcoholic Beverage Control Board to issue up to 20 additional restaurant or eating place licenses within the city and borough of Juneau under Alaska Statute 04-11-405.
Madam Manager.
Currently, our community exceeds the number of restaurant or eating place licenses, REPLs, and there appears to be demand for more alcohol licenses. Alaska law recently changed and now allows municipalities to apply for those additional REPLs. The Assembly Human Resources Committee discussed the recent changes to alcohol licensing, considered demand, and considered the impacts to existing alcohol license holders. Ultimately, the committee recommends the Assembly request 20 additional RPLs from the state. The Assembly Resource Committee discussed this topic on November 13th, 2023, December 11th, 2023, and January 8th, 2023. I recommend the Assembly hold a public hearing and then decide whether or not to adopt this resolution.
Thank you, Madam Manager. We have several people listed to testify on this measure, so we'll just
Madam
go down
Manager?
the list. Yes.
Or Madam Interim Mayor, I wanted to make a motion prior to public testimony. I believe that I can make a motion right now.
Is that correct, Madam Manager? Or Mr. Palmer?
I think it depends on the motion, and I think that if, so, yeah, yes.
Mr. Palmer, is that appropriate to make a motion at this point?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. It can be, depending on what the motion is. We'll
So
see.
we'll hear the motion. So should we hear the motion then, Mr. Palmer?
If it's a procedural motion, it could be in line. If it's a substantive motion, then no.
You'll tell us if it is or not. Mr. Bryson.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. The motion is to remove this item from the agenda and to table it to a date certain of November 18th, 2024. So I was going to make a motion to table this item until a new assembly would be able to take it up.
And Mr. Palmer, is that appropriate, that motion?
No, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. It can be if the body is willing to consider it.
Okay, so then do I ask the body if they're willing to consider and then we vote on it? How do I do that?
If the body is, yes, you could ask the body if they're willing to consider it, and and then vote it up or down. You can go from there.
Okay, we will poll the body to find out if they're willing to consider Mr. Bryson's motion, which is to table this until a date in November. Madam, yes.
Mayor, is this a debatable motion? Pardon me. Madam Deputy Mayor, is this a debatable motion?
I believe it is, but I believe Mr. Palmer is telling us, no, it is not. Mr. Palmer is telling us that we have to vote first to consider whether we will entertain the motion. That's not debatable. And then we will vote on the motion, and I believe Mr. Palmer is saying that's not debatable either. Is that correct, Mr. Palmer?
So specifically to the question, is the motion to table debatable? And the answer is no. You have some discretion if you want to consider this motion right now, or if you want to hear public comment first.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Mrs. Gandes.
may I ask Mr. Attorney a question?
Yes, please.
Mr. Palmer, is this motion out of order in the same way that a motion was already in play? So by asking us if we want to entertaining it, or rather, if we want to entertain it, is it in order and proper, or is it sort of stepping outside the lines? I'm just trying to understand. We already had a motion on the table.
We did
And we did not have a motion on the table. Okay, so we were just in the lead up to.
Yes.
And now there's a motion to table. And that's not debatable.
Correct. I am not aware of a motion on the table other than the motion to table, if that makes any sense.
Mr. Palmer, is it possible for the assembly to discuss this before we vote, or would that be debating?
That would be debating, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think it's, oh, go ahead. No, I think it's Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I guess I was kind of wondering, is tabling the proper motion here if the goal is to move this to another meeting? Or would the more proper motion to be made a motion to postpone to a date certain?
Mr. Kelly, I believe that Mr. Bryson made a motion to table, and so that's his motion.
I was just asking about the desired effect. Is tabling the right motion, or is it called a motion to postpone? Because I believe a motion to postpone is debatable.
I think that Mr. Bryson has figured that out.
Okay.
So I believe at this point, Mr. Palmer, and just nod your head if that's correct, or say yes, at this point, we will vote on whether to consider the motion to table. Is that correct?
Madam Deputy Mayor, I think the question is that you need to ask is Mr. Bryson's motion just simply to table?
Mr. Bryson, is your motion simply to table this item?
Yes, I would move to table this item.
And Mr. Palmer, can you explain the effects of tabling an item, an ordinance?
Yes, if the majority of the assembly votes yes, then this item is done for this cycle, so through October, unless there's some other procedural rule that happens. If the assembly votes no, then the public hearing would occur, and then you would decide what to do. And I'll just note that you would not be able to table this anymore because the assembly will have already voted on that question.
If we actually do proceed with hearing it, if we vote no.
Correct.
Okay. So first, we are going to vote on whether to consider Mr. Bryson's motion to table. And then if we vote 5-4 to consider, no, I'm seeing, Madam Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So we have our handy little procedural chart here, and I think the confusion arises from the difference between postponing for a time certain, which is debatable, and the motion to table, which is not debatable. So the motion to table is one vote. And as I understand, Assemblymember Bryson has clearly stated his motion is just to table it. So that's why I think we're getting a little wrapped around the axle. So the way I understand it, and certainly Attorney Palmer can chime in here if he sees differently, it is just if the Assembly votes yes on tabling, we move on.
So, Mr. Palmer, is that correct? We just take one vote now on whether to table?
Correct. Sorry for the confusion.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. We're all figuring this out. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll on Mr. Bryson's motion to table Resolution 3051?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Bryson, on the motion to table Resolution 3051, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Walahida?
No.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Ms. Atkinson?
No.
Ms. Hale?
No.
And Mayor Weldon?
No.
Motion to table fails, 1 yea, 8 nay, 7 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. At this point, we will take public testimony. Thank you. So we don't have anyone on Zoom signed up to testify on this item. We'll just go down the list. Phoenicia Bingham. Just state your name and area of town you live in, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Venetia Bingham, and I reside in the Valley. I also am a downtown restaurant owner. Been in business about 10 years. I'm sure you all have received various types of letters considering the REDLs. This is just from where I am and for people who I've spoken to who have similar licenses as I do. I've been doing some research. It seems to be something that I think, if possible, can either be tabled or given more time for research. And the reason I sent a letter, I'm not going to reiterate the letter I sent to you, but there is, I don't believe there is a need for 20. I'm not sure what the need is, if there is any at all, considering there are current RDLs for sale, or REPLs for sale. I think there is a lot of different things that are going on with this item, and I think more research needs to be done. I was very interested to know how many people over the past 10 years have actually applied, and come to find out that the Alaska Alcohol Board does not keep a record of people who have applied. The only way to find out, I've been to the Alaska State Library, I went to the regular library. Juneau Empire doesn't have a working phone number because it doesn't really exist anymore. It's Sound Publishing. It seems from the wonderful women who are the librarians at the State Library, the only way to find that out is literally to microfilm every newspaper, because it is required of every person who's applying prior to the application going in, that for 3 consecutive weeks, you put in the legal notices that you're reaching out to apply for an REPL. So it's going to take time to do that, considering I am the owner of a restaurant. We work a lot. And I think that there's a lot of emotion based around this. And I feel like if given the time, we can figure out why. And the question is, why are we asking for this now? And I did watch the previous meetings that you had, and I do know that this doesn't have to be done immediately, because we are able to apply again in every other year. So I think it needs more consideration of why are you asking for this and why are we doing this now? Because I think there is some financial damages that can be done for current owners. So I think we should get to the root of what that is.
Thank you, Ms. Bingham, for your testimony. Do any members of the Assembly have questions? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Ms. Bingham, thank you for being here and for writing, and we've had some discussions on this already as well. Regarding the application, if a community is at their cap for licenses, is there anything for them to apply for? Or would they just be told there's no license that they could apply for? So I'm just curious about what you were hoping to find out there.
The oddness of it all is they require you to do some things before you can apply so they can reject you. That's how it was taught to me by told me by the alcohol board. Wonderful woman I spoke to today, and for some reason her name is slipping me. She explained it as, and the reason why I'm doing so is because I want to look for the need. Are we asking for 20? Do we need 100? Do we need 0? And the reason why I'm doing that is because I paid a very large sum for my license, and I don't mind telling everybody it was $60,000 for a restaurant in our community. And restaurants' profit margins really low. So my meaning for doing so was to see what that need is. So I was told that you have to do these steps, then apply with the alcohol board, and then they will turn around and reject it. But they do not keep any information on who has done and who has applied and who was rejected. With their old system, they currently have a new system that you may or may not know is about 6 months old. So they said the new system will do so. So the only way for them to find the information, because if there's a need, I don't think there's anyone in this room who is against, we all want new small businesses. It's kind of what we do. It's kind of what Alaska lives on. So
Ms.
we're
Bingham,
not saying,
let's,
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, it's maybe more than the answer, more than the question.
My reason for doing so was to find out what the need is.
Mr. Smith, follow up.
Thank you. A follow-up on that. If someone knew that there was a cap and they knew they were going to get denied, isn't there a decent likelihood that they just wouldn't even go through any of the trouble?
That's a really good question. I asked that question also because it seemed like a lot of work to do to be denied. And she said it opens up the door for potentially other options because they do have discussions. Regulations are very large. So they do discuss other potential options. There are, and I don't know them all, but there are other ways of going about to get a license, hence buying from a private person, private owner, maybe a different form of license. There are seasonal licenses, there are different things that are available. So that discussion comes up to the table. But even to put in the application, and I found that odd that they would reject you, but make you do the work first.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Bingham? Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Bingham. Next, we have Marty McEwen. Thank you, Mr. McEwen. State your name and area of town you live in, and you will have 3 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Marty McEwen. I live in the Valley. I'm here on behalf of my daughter. I don't have a restaurant, but I just started the vintage food truck park in the Valley, and my daughter owns Crepe Escape, and she bought that 2 years ago. And she has expanded from one location downtown to her second location in the Valley at my food truck park. She's a tenant. So, and her plan is to open a third truck with a beer and wine license, which she is in the process of purchasing from another businessman in this town for a value of upwards of, I'm just going to say it's over $50,000. It's less than 70. So, it's a lot of money, and she's a young business person that she's come back, and I'm proud of her to move back to Juneau and start her own business. And, I feel like this has been set up, everybody knows there's X amount of licenses per, based on a population basis. to go and flood the market unnecessarily and devalue something she's already invested an enormous amount of money into, and which many other businessmen and businesswomen and people have done. They invest in this asset that it's substantial, and to toss in 20 more licenses when there's already 6 or 7 on the market right now for sale is unnecessarily disrupting the business community, and we're opposed to it. And I think it's sending the wrong message to have the government come in and step all over the business like this, and just, like I said, flood the market and devalue things is not necessary. And I would like to ask that, I read a letter today from Jared Cure, who's in the business more so than I am. I'm in the real estate market, but I want to know, I'd ask if everybody read his letter. He had so many great points in there, and very well said on many things, and he broke down the numbers. I don't see anything in here, and of course I wasn't at the last 2 or 3 meetings that this seems like the business community and the restaurant community, we're not very well informed, because a lot of us are here, and it feels like this is just being kind of like, hey, let's, I don't know, kind of under the radar. So I would like to know, it sounds like everybody's nodding their head, that his letter was read, and the numbers, I thought those numbers were really factual and brought a lot of light to, educated me quite a bit on the subject. So I know my time's up.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. McEwen. Are there any questions for Mr. McEwen? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. Are things like other, I guess, licenses, like real estate agents, are those limited? And if they aren't, do you think they should be?
No, they're a professional license. They're limited to somebody who's going to go and educate and invest themselves into learning the industry and paying the money, but it's a flat, fixed fee. It's not something that goes up and down. It's not an asset. It's a professional business license. So I don't think it's the same thing, right? So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. McEwen. Appreciate your testimony.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sky Steckel. Mr. Steckel, state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Sky Steckel. I live in Knock Bay, and I'm here representing Forbidden Peak Brewery. I'm here in support of Assembly Resolution obtaining additional repos. There has kind of historically been a process to obtain additional licenses through the petition process, and that, as you know, during this last alcohol rewrite, that onus has left us as business owners and gone to you guys to request additional licenses. So it's no longer in our boat. Our business can currently apply for a seasonal repo through the state, and these are licenses that are available and readily available, and there are a lot of them. And so I think a lot of the comments about saturation, like that's already happened, but those seasonal repos are only good for 6 months of a calendar year. And I think one of the issues I have with that is those licenses don't incentivize businesses to remain open year-round. And they also fall short of our current cruise season, which is now stretching, into 7 months. And finally, something to think about, I think, is how often do you want this topic to come before you as business owners? If this is a direction that we want to go, how often will we come back to you and request you to go request additional licenses? And how often do you do it when each business comes forward to have this discussion again? Or I think that's kind of the general idea of the 20 is that you have things available so that if there are people that come together come forward with a request that they don't have to wait 1 to 2 years to get that request through? And will that stop businesses from wanting to start? Yeah, I guess that's about all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Steckel. Are there any questions for Mr. Steckel from members of the Assembly? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jake Rydell.
Good evening, everyone, and Assembly members.
Area of town, your name and your area of town you live in.
Yeah, of course. My name is Jake Rydell. I live in Lemon Creek.
Thank you.
My name is Jake, and I am co-founder and operator and owner of Devil's Club Brewing Company in downtown Juneau. When these new laws were adopted by the state legislature, we were very excited as a brewery because for the first time we were legally allowed to acquire an REPL, a restaurant eating place license, as a license that was previously illegal for a manufacturer to own. This retail license would be great for us because it would remove the entertainment restrictions of our brewery license. My point is, Devil's Club has every intention of acquiring an REPL. However, there is a new type of license called a seasonal REPL, which allows everything an REPL does but for 6 months of the year. Unlike REPLs, seasonal REPLs are not at cap and probably never will be because they are based on tourism population. So Juneau could essentially have hundreds. For Devil's Club to get a seasonal REPL, we would just apply to the state and get one. So guaranteed 100% Devil's Club would have an REPL for 6 months of the year. This is very exciting. This route of the seasonal REPL is much more attractive than haggling and spending tens of thousands of dollars just to operate for the other 6 months of the year. Because at this point, the question of the value of an REPL is how much is it worth to operate during the winter? Because the license for the summer 6 months is free, the answer to that question, quite simply, is not tens of thousands of dollars. It's just not. But Devil's Club would much rather have an REPL for the rest of the year because we are a business that believes in the strength of Juneau as a year-round community and not just a cruise ship port. The choice before the Assembly today is simple. Should we add more licenses? Choosing no means limiting the competition and further encouraging and a closed market for year-round businesses, a great detriment to the consumers who live here. Or the Assembly could choose yes. Let's add more licenses. This would allow new local businesses to operate year-round instead of just the summer and encourage a healthy, competitive industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rydell. Are there any questions from the Assembly for Mr. Rydell? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you for coming tonight. You'd mentioned that you guys were looking for a license prior to this, or you were interested in it prior to this rule change. Is that what I understood from your testimony?
Yeah, we're always interested in a new license type that becomes available to us. But
the reason why I asked that is that I've got a
money.
list here that has 7 licenses that it looks like that are available here in town. Had you looked into acquiring one of the licenses that was already available in town?
We have looked into it in a number of different ways. What I'm trying to argue tonight is that the seasonal REPL is going to be available 6 months of the year, regardless, from the state. And the other 6 months, is that worth the extra tens of thousands of dollars? So to just have 20 extra licenses available, I think would be beneficial so more year-round businesses can operate in that way, not just a seasonal license.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Thank you, Mr. Rydell. Are there any further questions for Mr. Rydell? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we have Don McDougall. Very sorry, thank you. Mr. Falk. Mr. Falk, state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Mitch Falk. I live here in Juneau. I own Bullwinkle's Pizza. I'm on the clock. Do I push the button? I'm good to go. Okay. So this whole question kind of confuses me. When I bought Bullwinkle's 18 years ago, I was one of the few people here in town that owned 2 of these licenses, these REPLs, and they're a critical part of my business. And when I bought Bullwinkle's, to get those licenses and that business, I hawked everything I own. And I paid that off, and like I said, these licenses are a critical part. To open or to come up with, out of thin air, almost the exact same number of licenses that we have would devalue our licenses to at least half, if not more. And the investment that we have would be out the window, and that doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like this whole process is to almost harm the existing businesses. Almost every business owner I see in here has worked hard for what they have and the licenses that go with them. There are 7 licenses available right now for sale. And if somebody wanted one, they should just buy one, just like we did. And I think that is the only fair way to approach this. If not, if we are going to just come up with these licenses out of thin air, I think I'd like to raise my hand for a couple of them. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Are there any questions from members of the assembly? Mr. Smith? You're good, okay. Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Falk. Our next testifier on this topic is Leanne Thomas.
Wow, that list went fast. Leanne Thomas, I live in Ock Bay. I also own the Triangle Club. And I guess I have heard you guys have already thought about how this affects other business owners, the license hold owners. I was watching both of the meetings that we've talked about, and I felt like the word 20 came out of nowhere. Like, just grabbed it. Like, what about 20? How do you feel about 20? And 20 would crush many of the license holders in this room, and definitely there's other people that don't even know that's happening, because our EPLs were the only people that were told. Beverage dispensary license, people paid $300, $350 for those licenses. And we've already had people that told you our EPLs go for $75 to $50. We are a good group of business owners that have paid into the regulations the city has told us to do based on population. We run good, most of us year-round businesses, and the ones that are seasonal have been here a long time. They hire local people, they give back to the community, and we are struggling with staffing. We don't have enough staff. So part of your resolution was talking about it provides more job. Well, please send us those people you want to employ, because we're having a hard time employing people, keeping people. Seasonal businesses that are opening up take our employees, because they come right into your business and offer them $10 more an hour to work their seasonal job. Well, if you're going to keep those people in October, November, and December, you can't afford to pay $10 more, especially if you offer benefits. And I offer profit sharing, but it's very difficult to keep your people in the seasons, okay? And we also struggle with housing our employees. I can find employees, and then they're like, oh, I lost my housing. I'm going to go home to Seattle or wherever. So I have a problem with bathrooms too. If some of these new places you want, because you want more sales tax dollars, I'm assuming, are going to be food carts downtown without bathrooms, I have found that the city has not provided enough bathrooms, at least down in the historical district And if you want to argue with me, I would love for you to come into my business in a summer day and sit there and let's count together. And yeah, you can say, no, they're for our customers, but are you going to tell a little old lady no? Or a guy that rushes in and like, no, I just need to use your bathroom. I was having beer someplace else, but they don't provide bathrooms. So bathrooms, staffing, housing, competing with seasonal. And that's not a joke. It's not me. My son works for a business and he's been propositioned to come to a seasonal place. And your 20 places will hurt year-round businesses. And I personally have already struggled to not stay open in the winter.
Ms. Thomas, you need to wrap it up.
Yep.
Thank you.
So if you want to hurt year-round businesses in this town, this is the perfect way to do it, people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Are there any questions for Ms. Thomas? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. I'll take my turn. One of the questions, if you had been able to acquire one of these licenses that are being, at this point, requested or potentially requested at no cost, would you have been able to pay your employees $10 more an hour, perhaps attract a larger workforce?
Yes, if I came in at a low entry level and I didn't choose to buy the 7 licenses that are not being used. And by the way, if you ask a realtor or anything, there's probably more and other types of licenses, okay? Yeah, I could probably, if I didn't own a building, I made a little shack and I didn't have to pay that license, I would be able to pay more per hour. Absolutely.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Thomas, for coming to testify again. As a business owner, you mentioned that you have a problem with the number 20 new licenses. Is there a different number that you think would be more appropriate?
Not right now, not if you guys haven't done your education of licenses in this town, the need, the problems that local business owners are already having. My answer is 0. And especially if people have come to you, well, ask them to look at places that are not being used. That's calling AMCO and asking the licenses that are not being used right now. And talk to those owners, talk to realtors. There's license for sale. And this is, people have entered into this profession putting their life commitment into this and their money to be part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. We will move on now to David McCaslin. Mr. McCaslin, please state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Hey, my name is David McCaslin. I live in Douglas. I own Deckhand Dave's Fish Tacos. I'm here to testify against this. In your resolution here, it says there appears to be a demand for more alcohol licenses, but there is not. I currently have 2 for sale. There are 2 other that I know of for sale, and it sounds like there's 3 more that I don't know of for sale. They are available for purchase. I currently just bought the nastiest building in Juneau to acquire a liquor license, which was one of the main reasons for buying this building. When I bought this building, I tore it down. The rear foundation wall collapsed, which I was going to reuse. That is a pretty expensive thing. It's the cost of a house to redo this foundation wall. I am banking on selling 2 of these licenses to help me fund my project. So 20 more licenses will not only devalue the license, my BDL license that I just got, it will devalue the 2 other licenses I'm trying to sell. I just took huge loans at 8% for the rest of my life so I could do this and live in this community. And I'd like to be able to keep doing that. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. McCaslin. Are there any questions for Mr. McCaslin? Mr. McCaslin, I have a question. You don't get off that easy. Mr. McCaslin, were you aware of the legislature that considering and passing the law that actually creates this avenue for more licenses.
I heard about new licenses, the potentiality of this happening, but it was ultimately up to the assembly to make this call. And a lot of these licenses, this particular resolution or the adding of being able to give it to the community to make up how many are available was something to do with Wasilla, but they have like a completely different setup over there, and Juneau is not quite the same.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I knew it was going to come from the assembly, and so that's why I'm here to testify.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
I can't let you have all the fun. Mr. McCaslin, as a young business owner, would it have been helpful for you to start your business if the financial barrier to entry to starting a business was lower? If it costs less to get into your business, would that have been better for you and as a business owner?
Mr. McCaslin.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I would take more money at any point in time. But right now, I have licenses for sale, and I will owner finance them to anyone that wants to buy them at any cost that makes it that appeals to them. So anyone that wants it, 2 people over there, I will sell it to you. Owner finance, 0 interest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCaslin. Paul Thomas.
Paul Thomas from Ock Bay area.
Thank you. You have
First-
3 minutes.
Okay, first of all, I just want to be clear, this is a big mistake. Title IV was a huge project. Title IV is the rules that we function under as liquor people. Took over 10 years to get there. Some things were introduced late in the game that maybe weren't vetted completely. This is definitely one. You're looking at wiping out businesses in this town that have been generational by throwing away their investments to doing this. It's a big deal. And I think that we're going to find more things in Title IV. There are big holes like this as we work through the regulation projects and that kind of stuff. But just because something maybe is possible doesn't mean we should do it. Doesn't mean we should throw our existing business owners under the bus because we can, because we think we might get some more tax dollars. The fact is, you're not going to get any more tax dollars because most of these people are going to wipe out some of these people. It'll be a net zero for the city, except for the fact that you'll lose this generational business owners. This is a no-go. You shouldn't even be considering it. Table it from the beginning and get rid of it.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Are there any questions for Mr. Thomas? Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your testimony. Last but not least, Risha Wilson, please. Ms. Wilson, state your name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brescia Wilson. I live in Douglas, and I own the Hangar on the Wharf. Thank you for all your hard work. I hope that all of you had an opportunity to read my very short email, register the concerns and potential unintended consequences. And I'd be happy to answer any of your questions as it relates to the very complicated Title IV law that's come into play here January 1st, and all the changes to we that have been in business in this community for, in my case, 28 years in the restaurant business. I think that it's a high calling to ask all of you to try to understand the complex nature of Title IV, the impacts, economic impacts, long-term, short-term, what have you. I applaud the breweries here in town, the distilleries that have plowed their way through in terms of changing the law to create the new privilege and economic entrepreneurship that we've seen here in Juneau, so I do applaud that. I do, however, think that we need to take some pause here this evening. I've been in the industry for a long time, and in my letter, I think I stated that most year-round restaurant operators really don't have time to follow resolutions. It's unfortunate. I found out about it on Friday. I called a few of you. One of you said, hey, check your email. Sorry, I get hundreds of emails a day. We're in recruiting mode, and that's just what we're doing. We're paying attention to getting ready here for next summer. But nonetheless, I was blindsided. Super unfortunate that I was unaware of the HR meeting that happened. Again, I don't look at all the agenda meetings. To my understanding, and I can maybe shed a little light, and I apologize if I go over time, I believe that this Title IV rewrite did start in a kind of at the finish line in the legislature. Wasilla had a very specific concern. They have a low population. They had a big high demand with all the road systems, and they slipped in some language that allowed certain communities, and Juneau probably happens to qualify for one of them. But, you know, as I want to kind of give you the backstory, it's wild. And I'm just going to read this. I wrote a note to one of you folks, I can't remember who. You know, Wasilla was a big proponent for letting communities add licenses in the Title IV rewrite statewide. Just because Juneau qualifies for such action doesn't mean that it's a community that is limited by the population as it relates to supply, which is the number of REPLs that we have, not only have, but are available for sale. Versus the demand, which is new businesses seeking our EPLs. Let's pay attention to the math, not just react to what other communities are doing to address their specific needs. So, you know, at first I was like, wow, where did they get this
Ms.
number
Wilson,
20?
you need to wrap it up.
Where'd they get this number 20? I think right now we need to do our homework, guys.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members of the Assembly for Ms. Wilson? Thank you very much for your testimony. Much appreciated. The time is now 8:17. We'll take a break until 8:25 before we pick this back up. Thank you. Bring the assembly meeting back to order. We have one person who wanted to testify, and I failed to ask if there was anyone extra. So Brandon Howard, please come on up and testify. And if there are others, please just raise your hand. Thank you. I'll get you next. Mr. Howard, please state your name and area of town you live, and you have 3 minutes.
All right, hi, my name is Brandon Howard. I live in downtown Juneau and was more involved in Title IV rewrite stuff than I ever wanted to be, and wanted to come and testify, even though this doesn't really impact my license type. I think about other businesses, other startups, other people wanting to do something in the community. And yes, there are 6 or 7 licenses available for purchase, but as we know, $50,000 to $70,000 is a lot of money, and that is a lot of money that doesn't go into payroll for employees. That's a lot of money that doesn't go into renovations of buildings that we see and spaces that we see around town that need a lot of love. When I look at an issue like this, you know, I understand that people have invested a lot, right? I also recognize that, you know, as a member of the community living here, there are a lot of things that we don't have access to because of Alaska's unique quota system. So, what is it? 17 other states in the country have quota systems. Ours is uniquely strict, wherein most quota systems, you know, they tend to REPLs, or not REPLs, but BDLs. So anything where you're serving liquor. Beer and wine licenses amongst these 17 quota states are typically unlimited or significantly more lax. So, you know, Juneau and Alaska is kind of a unique thing. So I understand investments in businesses. I understand that these state-given licenses have become assets. It's a weird thing. But also, you know, I think of this barrier of entry, the places that the money does not go. I think about, you know, a place like El Zarape. I think about a lot of smaller restaurants that don't have access to this because at the end of the day, $60,000 is a lot of money. And what was it, in 1985, I think, when we went to this quota system as a state, a lot of people, you know, who had the license at the time now still have the license or had the opportunity to sell, but it really closed the door on seeing new business and seeing new opportunity. And so as a person who lives here, that's kind of always what I am excited for. And I think, you know, if you're a good place and you're open, I don't think that your REPL is the thing that is going to carry you through. Yes, it is an asset that you're maybe banking on, and that's a challenge, but competition is always great for businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Are there any questions for Mr. Howard? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. Sir, please come up. Please state your name and area of town you live in, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name's Jack Manning. I live in the Valley. Just a couple notes here. The liquor industry has never been free market. The liquor industry is limited entry, and there's good reasons for that. Similar to limited entry in fishing. It's to control alcohol issues, consumption. And the best enforcement is a high value license. You don't take chances, you don't skip IDing, you don't maybe not question this person because you're having trouble paying your bills this month. And if you flood the market with a lot of licenses, this is one of the issues. That's one of the reasons there's always been a limit on licenses. And this, even though the Title IV thing passed and stuff, and these opportunities here, you know, 20 seems like an incredible number. And if you flood the market, maybe you don't have as good operators. There's issues here that really need to be worked out, the seasonal versus year-round. You know, there is the effect of people who are trying to keep their businesses open all year, and then people come in the seasons and take the cream. If you get to a number, I don't know what number that might be. I don't know if you're stuck on 20, but maybe you could talk about some formula, maybe 2 a year, 1 a year, something, or 0, but not just to throw 20 of them out there. There's a lot of unknown effects, and I know you guys had some discussions, or different committees had some discussions. I just wasn't aware of them and didn't hear any of them, and a lot of us are in that boat, just not sure where your discussions started from or ended. So anyhow, that's my take.
Well, thank you very much for coming here and testifying, Mr. Manning. Is there any questions for Mr. Manning?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. At this point, we will, before we move on to a motion, I'd like to invite members of the Assembly to ask questions of Madam Manager or Mr. Deputy Manager, or if there are any questions, not statements, but questions, and we'll do that before any motions. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. This question would be for the city attorney. I'm not sure if he would have the answer, but I think if anybody does, he would. I've heard a lot of people who've testified this evening describe these licenses as assets. Is this something that businesses are able to put a collateral for down on a loan?
Mr. Palmer, are you aware of that answer?
Thank you. I have not studied this issue, so I don't want to speak without any specific knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Palmer. Are there any other questions for Mr. Palmer or managers? Madam Mayor? Sorry, I missed your hand.
That's all right. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. You're doing a fine job. This is actually for the attorney also. We have no control. If we pass this, we have no control over who gets these, correct? So we can't put caveats that only new businesses or anything on this, correct? That's all up to the state. I don't even know if they do randomly. I don't know how the state figures out who gets one. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor and Madam Mayor. So you're right. The role the city has is to request, and then the state AMCO or Alcohol Beverage Control Board would then issue would analyze and then issue licenses consistent with state law. And I don't know what they would do if they had, let's just say, 25 people apply on the same date. I'm not quite sure how they would go through that. I think we can all imagine how they would handle it if there were 10. But if the number exceeded the petition request, I'm not sure what they would do.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Are there any other questions? I don't see any. Mr. Smith, I believe you have a motion.
I'm trying to figure out the right way to do this. I would. Well, I want to amend it, but we need to move it first. Yeah, well.
Do you want to speak about your intent before you make your motion?
Sure, that's good, and I'm now just thinking about the steps. So we've heard a lot of good testimony tonight. Appreciate the staff for reaching out to REPL holders and alerting them to this. It is part of the process, and we put it on public testimony so we could get this, we could hear from you all. So thank you all for doing this. My intention for 2 sets of motions are going to be to reduce the number down to 5, and then I'm going to move to table this for about 6 months into November. I think we can maybe just give people a chance to learn more, talk more, see how this might play out. The seasonal REPLs are going to be interesting. It will be interesting to see if people are buying the full REPL at the price that they're at currently, but I think maybe just, I don't love it. I don't love the current system. I think it restricts economic opportunity and chances for businesses to open, but it is the system we have. And I understand that people would get harmed if we did this change, so. I think this is the way I'll do it.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, or Madam Deputy Mayor, I move that the Assembly postpone action on Resolution 3051 until no earlier than November 4th, 2024. And I object for the purposes of an amendment.
Let's hear that amendment then, Mr. Smith.
Very
It's
good.
creative.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My amendment is to change the number in the resolution from 20 to 5, and that is on lines 10 and 44 of page 1 and lines 58 of page 2. So that the amendment is to change that number from 20 to 5.
And this is on page 51 of the package.
Yes, thank you. Yep, I was doing net pages of the ordinance, yes.
What line was, give us those lines
Yep.
again, please.
On page 1 of the ordinance, so page 51 of the packet, it's lines 10 and 44. Page 2 of the ordinance, 50, and it's line 58 of page 2.
Ms. Euskandis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is probably out of order. It was for the maker of the motion, but I can save it for discussion.
Okay, thank you. And that is your motion?
It is.
That is your amendment. Are there any objections to Mr. Smith's amendment? I see an objection from Ms. Euskandis and Mahal Gidak. Ms. Euskandis.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not in the room, so I don't know if Mr. Smith conferred with Madam Manager or Mr. Palmer in that break. I guess I'm wondering, I understand the intent to reduce the number based on testimony we have heard. It still opens up some opportunity, which I like. I find myself compelled by some of the arguments. We've had a mix of testimony in our email and tonight, and it for both for and against increasing opportunity under this new set of regs. And so this reduces it kind of drastically, given that we can do this every other year or we'll have to wait another year. So I don't know if there was some piece of information Mr. Smith took away that made that number make sense, or why that would be such a smaller number after the nature of the discussion that I heard in committee as I followed that. And perhaps in discussion that will be answered by Mr. Smith, and that will make me want to remove my objection, but I guess that's my initial objection.
Mr. Smith?
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Euskandis. Again, I'm kind of doing it to give folks some time. Again, I don't like it. I said the reasons why, but I think maybe just in terms of giving current license owners, for us to learn more, for us to consider impacts, to see how this summer goes, to see the impacts of these seasonal REPLs. I'm promoting kind of cooling off for about 6 months, and that's my intent. My intent is to lower the numbers so that people don't feel like it's going to be 20 in 6 months, but I'm saying let's lower it to 5 and then cool off for 6 months, and we can reevaluate in November. So,
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Euskandis, is that it then?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think hearing that Mr. Smith's intent is still to wait 6 months. Well, and also I thought you said November. November is not 6 months from now. Are you?
Your math is correct, mine. Maybe I shouldn't be playing with the numbers then.
But do you have a question, Ms. Euskandis? or can
I don't have a question, but having heard it, I guess I'm maintaining my objection because, and I'm pointing out that November is not the 6 months.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Euskandis. Wahalgadak, and then Mr. Bryson and Mr. Kelly. And Madam Mayor, sorry, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I had some of a similar thought process as to Ms. Hughes-Ganges. I also am not a big fan of punting things down the road. I believe in hitting things head on. If we're going to talk about it, let's talk about it and let's make a decision. I don't know if I'll be here. I'm up for, if I choose to run for re-election, I'll be up for re-election this year, and I don't know if I'll be here in November. And I don't always feel comfortable punting things to an assembly member who, would possibly fill my seat. And on that note, when we're thinking about the 20 additional REPLs, the reason that number came about was for opportunity in our community. I can respect that a lot of people in this room spent a lot of money on their licenses to get where they were, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Not everybody has those means, including a lot of people who are people of color. So when we're talking about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it's not always an option for folks. This was intended to create additional opportunities for those without the means to be able to jump into the market, and to see where things could go with new innovation in our community and see what could be come about from this. So with all of that said, I'll maintain my objection.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Yes, please, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Smith needs to decide what he's doing. If he's making an amendment, then we can talk about the amendment. If he is opting to postpone takes precedence over amendment. So he needs to decide what we're talking about right now, because I'm confused. And again, if part of his motion is to postponement takes precedent over amendments.
Mr. Palmer, can you clarify that? We're looking at our little sheet here.
Yeah, no, the mayor got it. So a motion to amend is a lower priority or a motion to postpone until further discussion. So Mr. Smith is in an awkward position that he made both at the same moment. So he either needs to withdraw the motion to postpone, or there's no debate on the amendment because the motion to postpone takes precedence.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, and thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Smith, what would you like to do?
I'll withdraw my amendment, Madam Deputy Mayor. Because I have to.
So you'll leave the original motion to postpone?
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the motion to postpone?
I just have another inquiry for the attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Is a motion to postpone in order when there is no motion on the table? Because the ordinance hasn't been moved yet, correct?
Through the deputy mayor, it is on the table. It's a motion that's right.
There is a motion to postpone this resolution.
Okay, I thought, okay, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. There's a motion to postpone Resolution 3051 until November 24th. Are there any objections?
I object.
I see Wahalgadak and I see Ms. Hughes-Gandes. Wahalgadak, would you like to speak to, and I see Mr. Bryson, would you like to speak to your objection?
I think I already spoke to it pretty well.
Thank you. Ms. Hughes-Gandes, do you want to speak to your objection or are you good?
Yeah, I'll just wrap up briefly, just because part of it was my confusion before. I'll echo that I agree with what Wahalgadak said. I think that was spot on. I do recognize very much and appreciate the testimony from everyone who came tonight. And I do recognize that there has been significant investment from businesses in our community to get into this industry. And as we know, it's highly regulated in Alaska and strangely regulated. And it has taken them a long time to do this rewrite. And I have been watching with interest as they've done it. Throughout that process, I heard from owners in our community, again, both people who are concerned that they were going to get hurt and people who are excited that they thought there was opportunity. I just wanted to add to this that as I'm thinking about this, we're often like in the seat that we're in, we don't want to regulate in a way that's going to harm anyone in our community, but we also don't want to regulate the market selectively in a way that to protect just some small group's interests. And I'm not saying that anyone is asking us to do that, but that is something we have to take into consideration, how it affects the whole community, not just folks who have made an investment. And if we do ever, I'll just add as a one-off, if we do ever get there with housing, that is an example of it is going to adjust. People will not be able to sell their, it's a supply and demand thing. So I'll leave it at that and leave my objection.
Thank you, Mrs. Gandes. I have Mr. Bryson, and then I have Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm going to support Mr. Smith in this motion. We were not given 100% correct information when the AMCO presented to HRC. I left that meeting understanding that there were 0 available REPLs out there, because in AMCO's eyes, if somebody owns it, it's tied up. And so these 7, and I have a list here somewhere I can pull up. So there are REPLs available for sale in the community. The community is not limited from that opportunity. Having the information that none were available got me excited about this. If we have 0 available, we need to do something about it, but that's not the case. There are licenses available. And before I would say that we want to be cautious about harming existing people that own these, it's not just people that own these existing licenses, they're businesses and employers of our community. And so kicking this down the road a little bit, which is not a good practice for us, and I'm not usually in favor of it, but I don't believe there's enough information out. A lot of people that testified today said they only had awareness of this since Friday, and it's hard to follow all this stuff. But even I had incorrect information, and before we take action that directly harms existing businesses, we may want to pause, give the industry a chance to vet what the seasonal RPL, see what the impact that has on the community. I'm okay somewhat with Mr. Smith's small number of 5, if that's what we're
not talking about that.
We're not talking about that. So if we could give the community more time to either vet this information, find out what is the right way, what is the right number, how should we go about this? I think we do need to take the extra time, because this action would cause direct financial harm to existing Juneau businesses, and we should take a pause and a little bit extra time before we take an action that does that. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bryson. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I find myself in a weird position also. We're trying to not cause further harm to businesses, but trying to allow new entrepreneurs to come in. But my question to the attorney before gave me pause, because there's nothing to say that new entrepreneurs are going to get the 5 or 20. Because what would prevent people that already have license from going to get the other ones, and then we just have saturated the market tremendously. So I normally would never say this, but I would move to postpone. The folks that want RPLs are about ready to go into a seasonal RPL, so we're really not hurting them until we see what AMCO does anything further, or the state legislature, because I know that there's still going to have to be work on this a little bit. So I normally wouldn't say postpone, but this time I would agree with the postponement.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I have another question for the attorney in light of the mayor's questions or statement. I guess I often see in the consent agenda that we have the opportunity to I'm looking for the word for it, to oppose or to oppose a new permit or license. Under what grounds are we able to do that? Can it be for any reason, or do we have to have a specific public safety reason?
Mr. Attorney, and you're speaking about liquor licenses.
If you give me a couple moments, I can go digging. If you want to take other questions, I'll get back to you here in a second.
Okay, are there other questions? Who? Oh, Madam Clerk.
If I might be able to let the attorney off the hook on that one. The protest of any liquor license, either the issuance, the renewal, or the transfer, cannot be arbitrary, capricious, or unfounded. There are very specific items in Title 20 of our city code that give us the basis for any protests, and they have to be very specific on what those reasons are. Sales tax delinquency, property tax delinquency, those sorts of things. Building code violations, fire code violations, but they are very narrow construction and not arbitrary or capricious.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate your stepping in. I just have one comment. I think I also am in support of the postponing this. And one thought that I had about the seasonal license is one of the things that we complain about as residents all the time is that there's stuff that's open in the summer and then it closes down in the winter. So that's just, I'm just really interested to see how that whole seasonal license issue plays out. But that's just a thought. Are there any other comments, or are we ready for a vote on the postponement? It appears that we're ready. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Ms. Hale. For Mr. Smith's motion, sorry, let me get back to my notes to find his motion, to postpone Resolution 3051 to November of 24. Mr. Smith.
Yes.
And Wallachida.
No.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Ms. Hughes Scandies.
No.
Mr. Bryson.
Yes.
Ms. Atkinson.
Yes.
Ms. Hale.
Yes.
And Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Motion to postpone is approved, 5 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you. We will move on now. Thank you to the audience members for being here. We'll move on now to resolutions 3055. Madam Clerk.
Yeah, you want to give it?
We'll give just a couple minutes for everybody to leave, to clear the room. Sir, you dropped your hat. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. This is Resolution 3055, a resolution partially opposing the petition submitted by the City of Hoonah for incorporation of the Hoonah Borough, including Horse Island, Colt Island, and the Mansfield Peninsula on Admiralty Island.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
The City of Hoonah recently submitted a petition to the Local Boundary Commission to form the Hoonah Borough. The petition proposes to annex the northern portion of Chickasaw Island, the Glacier Bay area, and the northern tip of Admiralty Island, including Horse and Colt Islands. The proposed Hoonah Borough would likely be beneficial to people living in, working in, and visiting the area. However, the northern tip of Admiralty Island may be challenging because it is within the City and Borough of Juneau model borough boundaries and has substantially more connections to the Juneau community than any other area. The whereas clauses in the resolution describe those connections. On January 29, 2024, the Assembly Committee of the Whole discussed this topic and recommended the Assembly consider submitting a public comment to the Local Boundary Commission. Comments are due on February 28th. I recommend the Assembly hold a public hearing and then decide whether or not to adopt this resolution.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this resolution? Seeing none, I bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt Resolution 3055, resolution partially opposing the position submitted by the City of Hoonah in corporation of the Zuna Borough, including Horse Island, Coal Island, Manfield Peninsula, and Admiralty Island. And I would ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Wahal Gadak, would you like to speak to your objection?
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I have a question though also. I'm seeing some new language on some of these that say the city manager recommends the Assembly hold a public hearing and then decide whether to adopt this resolution. And I don't recall seeing that before because most of the time it's the Assembly adopt this ordinance. Are you saying aside from the one we're holding right now, that you're recommending a separate
Madam Manager.
public hearing?
Sharp read of the packet. This is my way of threading the needle and on a topic that might be really squarely in the policy wheelhouse, and that the Assembly has really indicated a strong desire to hear from the public. So it is not recommendation of a second public hearing, but rather recommendation. Rather, I'm not providing any specific policy direction to you today. And sometimes I do recommend adoption on the agenda.
And if I may, Wahal Gadak, I believe that part of the reason for recommending the public hearing is that we don't normally have to have a public hearing on a resolution. It's normally part of the consent agenda. So both the last one and this one, we pulled from the consent agenda to have resolution, or to have a hearing.
I'll speak to my objection now, if that's okay.
Okay, did you want to speak further? Okay, please.
Sorry, Mr. Bryson.
Actually,
Wait,
I incorrectly made my motion. I needed to make my motion in the way that Wahal Gadak interpreted, because I was questioning that at the beginning, and that's actually what I would have intended the motion to be, to, instead of the Assembly adopting it, I was hoping that the Assembly could open it up for a public hearing, but I was confused because we're in public hearing now. So I would like to restate my motion, Madam Deputy Mayor.
all right, Mr. Bryson, please restate your motion.
I move that the Assembly forward Resolution 3055 for public hearing at the next available Assembly meeting.
Mr. Attorney, since this is a public hearing, is that something that we can do? Vote on?
Yes, if the body wants to postpone this to the next meeting, you can definitely do that. You may have to hold a special meeting so you can get the public comment in before February 28th. But if that's your desire, you can definitely do that.
Okay, are there any objections to Mr. Bryson's motion to hold a second public hearing? Mr. Kelly and Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I object for the purposes of a question. If I can have the manager restate. When I saw that in the packet myself, I just interpreted to mean, not to mean that you wanted a separate public hearing, but that you wanted to just stay neutral and not make a recommendation.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, Assemblymember Kelly, your interpretation of my recommendation is correct. That does not mean that the Assembly can't recommend a second public hearing if that's the will of the body. I would appreciate a little bit of guidance on when you'd like that to be held, just with calendars, and happy to suggest some dates.
Thank you, Madam Manager. I have Mr. Palmer, and then I have Mr. Smith and Ms. Hughes-Scandies. But Ms. Hughes-Scandies, your hand may have been raised for a bit. Are you okay if you go after Mr. Smith?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So I just want to be super clear. The Assembly just held a public hearing on this. This was legally noticed, and there was an opportunity for public comment that's now been closed, and so it's right for Assembly action if you want to consider it now, but you are definitely free to consider a second public hearing if you so decide.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I guess I'm just not totally sure why we'd hold another one, but maybe Mr. Bryson in comments would let us know. But we had it noticed. No one testified. I feel like I have the information to take action on it tonight. But maybe Mr. Bryson will elucidate us. And then also, we have to submit by February 28th, so we would have to hold a special meeting if we're, going to hear it, or maybe if it's after that, then I don't actually see the point of holding a public hearing because we've missed the.
Is that an
deadline.
objection then?
It is,
Yes,
yes.
okay. Mr. Bryson's spoken. Thank you. Ms. Hughes-Scandies and then Mr. Bryson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Objection for the reasons that Mr. Smith just said. This is sufficient, I think, for us to take action on either way. And then let's stick with just a timeline of dealing with this tonight in order not have a second meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes-Scandies. Mr. Bryson, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I should have read this 3 times. I envisioned that this would have like public notice the way that in the paper that all of our ordinances that are public notice, the information that the manager's office is saying now is that this resolution was included in this meeting's public notice section. It said this is going to be a public testimony. So public testimony was already made available to the public. That was the opportunity.
Just 15 minutes ago.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Are there further comments on Mr. Bryson's motion to hold an additional public hearing? Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry for the confusion on this. You can blame it on me. When we see a resolution that probably could use some public comment or just some more thought from the Assembly, we pull it from the consent agenda. So this is ultimately my fault because I told the city manager to pull this from the consent agenda and put it as public hearing as well as the other resolution, because otherwise it would have just passed with the consent agenda. So I figured the Assembly wanted to discuss it more. So it did follow all the criteria for public hearing. And I would support not having another public hearing. So.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there further comments on having an additional public hearing? Mr. Bryson.
I remove the motion, Madam Deputy Mayor. Sorry for the additional.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I think I'm getting tired. Mr. Bryson, do you have a motion?
Let me try this again, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt Resolution 3055 as written, ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Well, Hagedorn. Would you like to speak further?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Bryson, for making all those concessions and trying to get this right. I spoke to President Peterson actually at a reception right before this, and then I know that many have been trying to get a hold of the Ocwan about this resolution, and I'll just say that the Native community supports HUNA in this, and as far as the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida, and as far as not hearing from the Ocwan that they are in opposition to this, and so for those reasons, I will be a no vote on this.
Thank you, Hagedorn. Ms. Hughes-Scandies, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll also echo, I think you're doing great tonight. This is the most we've ever gotten wrapped around the axle, it seems to me. I'm objecting to this. I'll just say briefly, this is the sort of thing that can be at the last when we talked about whether to draft this resolution or even to send it to the meeting tonight. People made comments regarding the fact that, you know, as policymakers here in Alaska, we're aware of the fact that all of this is on stolen land, and yet we are working within these constructs of cities and states and a state constitution that says the whole state should be organized into boroughs, and we have a model boundaries and the LBC. So I really wrestled with this one because looking through the whereases, I see, you know, these are factual statements, and I find them compelling that there are certainly areas in this section that I think are more closely aligned economically with Juneau as a borough. But in getting some questions answered today about what the effect would be as the Boundary Commission makes their determinations, and given that right now the city and borough is not interested in if we put in this comment and this section didn't go into the Hoonah borough, it still would be an unorganized borough. So in that sense, it's not adding it to the Juneau borough. We're just saying, hey, don't put it in Hoonah, but also just leave it unorganized. And so I'm not interested in further annexation, but I'm not sure that there's really something to be gained by saying, don't put it with them as they try to organize. And then secondly, we're a funny state where different things happened at different times, and sometimes as our community is an example, we were already incorporated and formed our borough before those lines existed. The model existed afterwards. And so knowing that, I think Juneau is fine as it is, and I don't think we need to make this comment. And that I recognize, though, that being said, that I think this resolution is compelling. But I don't think we need to do it, so I'll be a no vote.
Thank you. Mayor Weldon.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the two ladies talking to me before me. I also appreciate the attorney carefully drafting this resolution where a lot is whereas. And I just want to speak in favor of the resolution because the whereas makes sense. They are more, that portion of land is more towards Juneau than it is in Hoonah. And I'm just making it quite clear, I'm not saying anything about annexation whatsoever. I have no desire to go into that fight. And if we did decide to annex anything, I think our annexation discussion would be much, much different than the last one we had, which would probably be a good thing. But I just think that the ties to Juneau are much stronger for a variety of reasons than the ties to Hoonah. And I have to do a very fine line here. I did get hold of Fran Houston. She is on vacation and she was unaware of this, and I got a hold of her at the beginning of last week, but it takes them a while to comment on anything. But what she did say was, gave me a bunch of books that I should look up and see what was Occoquan land, and told me that that is Occoquan land and not Hoonah land. And I believe Mr. Attorney does have a map that shows that if anybody needs to see that, on her advice of looking up where Occoquan land was. So I'm not speaking for her. I'm just saying part of our conversation. So I would vote yes, and I realize this will keep it in an unorganized borough. And I'm okay with that because perhaps Angoon might want to do something someday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Are there further comments? I also, I'll just have a brief comment. I support this resolution, and part of the reason I support it is that we are not making a decision at this point to annex that land. That is for a future assembly to make that decision. But if we don't file this, we lose the opportunity to petition in the future. So this land then goes to the Hoonah Borough if the Boundary Commission agrees. So we lose the opportunity if we don't actually file this opposition for that one small section of land. So I think, Madam Clerk, we are ready to, let's see, we're ready to call the question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, for passage of resolution 3055. Mr. Bryson?
Yes.
Ms. Atkinson?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Walahida?
No.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
No.
Ms. Hale?
Yes.
And Mayor Weldon?
Yes.
Motion passes. We have 5 yeas and 3 nays.
Are we okay to keep going, or do we need a little break? We'll take a break in a bit. Or you want to break now? No, take a bit. We'll break in a bit. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 16 on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
This is ordinance 2023-36, version B as in boy, an ordinance authorizing the sale of foreclosed property located at 5206 6th Street by sealed competitive bid auction.
Madam Manager.
In June of 2023, the City and Borough of Juneau received a clerk's deed for the property located at 526th Street, downtown Star Hill area, after the owners failed to pay property tax for the years of 2019 through 2022. The property consists of a 5,353 square foot lot and a 780 square foot house, which is in poor condition. The current amount owed for tax years through 2023, including penalties and interest, is approximately $22,324. This property will be sold through a sealed bid process, and if the property sells for more than the amount owed in taxes and penalties and interest, the remainder is forwarded to the former owner and lien holders. The Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee considered this topic at its meeting on July 13, 2023. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its January 9, 2024 meeting. Version B includes a correction to the legal description of the property and is being reintroduced as a result. I recommend the Assembly adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Walahida.
I move ordinance 2023-36B and ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objections, that ordinance is approved. Madam Clerk, item number 17 on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. We have ordinance 2023-14, version B U, an ordinance appropriating $900,000 to the manager for a loan to Coogan Alaska LLC for the Island Hills Building LMN project. Funding provided by the Affordable Housing Fund.
Thank you, Madam Manager, and I realized that I forgot to ask if there was public testimony on ordinance 2023-36B. Seeing none, we will move on. We do have someone listed for public testimony on this ordinance. This is Joshua Adams, and he is online, and I see that he has raised his hand and has been brought over. Mr. Adams, this is on 2022-14 version BU, and state
That is
your
correct.
name and area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Joshua Adams, and I am a local landlord in Juneau, Alaska. I've come here to talk about the housing crisis in Juneau as it relates to Ordinance 2023-14 BU. Some folks seem stuck on the idea that just throwing any kind of housing out there is going to create some mythical economy of scale that might alleviate pressure on the housing market. The concept of build it and they will come has not worked, and it's not going to work. Juneau has more housing units than ever before in its history, and yet we just keep giving more and more loans to contractors, as if building contractors were going to solve our housing crisis for us. This is magical thinking. We are not going to solve the housing crisis by more building of overpriced housing. It's like building boutique hotels to alleviate homelessness. This is Robin Hood in reverse. It's taking from the poor and giving to wealthy corporations. Juneau residents don't need more housing. They need housing to be more affordable. As Juneau's economy becomes more seasonal and consequently less diverse, there's a widening and adverse incentive for property owners to get onto the short-term rental bandwagon. As of June, nearly 600 housing units were tied up in Airbnb. Those are units that could be used for low-income residents. Why? Because it's a quick buck for anyone with a rental unit. Corporations from out of state have taken notice of this and subsequently rent and purchase living units with the intention of using them for the short tourist season. The need for housing is so great during that short season that we are willing to allow those living units to go empty most of the year. This is why the Telephone Hill redevelopment project is so ill-advised. It's another dumb, expensive mega project that can only serve outside seasonal interest. There's no way that the state is going to fund it, and neither will we. But I didn't come here to talk about Telephone Hill. I do want to talk about housing. You cannot allow this tendency to go unchecked without affecting the overall housing market. Homes are not meant to be hotels. Greed is causing real people to get kicked out of their homes. But you can help. You on the assembly. You have the levers. You can regulate short-term housing. You can offer tax incentives for landlords who offer long-term rentals. You can work with AHFC and Section 8 to set up a system that helps the working poor instead of moneyed interest. Now that you're discussing Ordinance 2023-14 BU, make sure that you require Coogan Construction to follow the affordability guidelines, just like Chilkat Vistas LLC under that same ordinance. Affordable housing loans to contractors should be for affordable housing. And please listen to Barbara Blake, Walal Yidak, and put in those guardrails so that Coogan Construction doesn't just take advantage of you and build more overpriced condos.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Are there any questions for Mr. Adams? Seeing no questions, we will bring this back to the assembly. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Assembly adopt Ordinance 2023-14 version BU and ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, that ordinance passes. Moving on, Madam Clerk, item number 18.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. This is ordinance 2023-14, version B, V, and version B of that original ordinance. An ordinance appropriating $2,250,000 to the manager for a loan to Chilkat Vistas LLC for Chilkat Vistas Apartments. Funding provided by the Affordable Housing Fund.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
During the 2023 Round 3 competition of the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund, the Application Review Committee recommended funding this project. This ordinance appropriates $2.25 million for a loan to Chilkat Vistas LLC to complete 48 efficiency apartment units. The ordinance includes an affordability requirement. The loan will be secured by the property to be developed. The Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee heard this at its November 6, 2023 meeting. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its meeting on January 9, 2024, and the Assembly Committee of the Whole recommend the Assembly adopt version B of this ordinance at its meeting on January 29, 2024. I recommend the Assembly adopt version B of this ordinance.
Are there any, Mr. Adams actually has signed up to testify on this ordinance as well. He's there. Mr. Adams, go ahead and testify on ordinance 2022-14BVB.
Yeah, naturally. No, I think that this is more kind of more in line with what you should be doing as an assembly. There are those guidelines in place for the Chilcat Vistas LLC project, and you notice that it's 48 efficiency apartment units. This is, I mean, it's kind of like the right way to do the wrong thing. I think what you guys really need to be focusing on, though, and this is better, by the way, but I think you really need to be focusing on grants for private property owners, people that want to restore old homes, and people that want to refurbish and utilize units that are not being used year round because of dilapidation or with other problems. I think grant funding would be a much more efficient approach of public funds than just lending out money to large contractors. Not saying anything bad about these contractors. I think that they're doing the best they can, but I just don't think that this is the most efficient way to go about the housing crisis. Again, it's not a question of more units. You're not going to fix this problem by giving more units, even if they are, I mean, reasonably affordable. What's reasonably affordable now? $500,000 for a condo. I think it has more to do with the sovereignty of private ownership and young people wanting to build their own homes. It's a very complicated question. It doesn't start or end with the housing crisis, but it does have a lot to do with good governance, and that's a very tedious, slow job. I know this is the end of the meeting, and you guys don't want me to harangue you about the housing crisis and that, but I really think that the housing crisis is symptomatic of a larger economic problem that's kind of been culminating over years, even decades. For one thing, we need an overhaul of the assessor database. That's one problem, a big problem, really. I don't think that the seasonal industry is paying its fair share, and that has a lot to do with taxes, especially unfair taxes like the bed tax, which disproportionately affects poor people and minorities. It has a lot to do with a lot of the things that people like, these buildings that are really underutilized, especially in downtown Juneau. And you kind of have to really work in partnership with each individual land property owner to fix that problem, and that problem is the real problem behind the housing crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Are there any questions for Mr. Adams? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you for coming, Mr. Adams. I do have a question. You raised this in your testimony for this item and also for the last item. You said that the increase in housing it would not alleviate the housing crisis that we're in, the increase in supply. I guess.
Yeah, I did say that, and I meant it.
Okay. So do you not feel that an increase in supply would perhaps increase or reduce the rise in inflation and allow more opportunity for people to buy homes?
Yes, it would, but not poor people, and mostly not people from Juneau. What it would help is it would help people who are invested in seasonal tourism, and people who want to house J1 visas from out of state and even out of the country, and people from out of the state as well who want to come and work here for 4.5 months out of the year. It's not going to help Juneau, not in the way that Juneau wants to be helped, not in the way that poor people want housing.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Are there further questions? Thank you, Mr. Adams, for your testimony, and thanks for waiting all this long time. Is there further testimony from members of the public on this ordinance? Yes, please come to the mic and state your name, area of town you live in, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name's Don McDougall. I live on Hillcrest Avenue. I want to say right up front that I'm all for affordable housing, and I think if this project goes through with the prices that they're saying, I think that's great. I'm a little bit leery of the city approving these projects and then backsliding like the condo, what turned into condos off of Glacier Avenue. What was supposed to be affordable housing is now really expensive condos. I hope that that doesn't happen here. I have some concerns with this project related to the fact that I was one of the first residents to buy in Hillcrest Vistas, and was told that basically the houses that would be built in front of us would be one-story houses. And now I'm looking at a two-story apartment building that's hundreds of feet long with over 100 cars probably if it's full to capacity. And I'm worried about my property value. I'm also concerned that, they're now into phase 3 that's been approved by the city. Phase 2 is they're currently building houses for, and I was in phase 1. And we still don't have city services on Hillcrest Avenue for the 14 houses that were built for phase 1. So I would caution you to slowly move this until some of those things are finished. This last snowstorm was really tough on a lot of the residents there because the road didn't get plowed because the city stops just before where the new development started. And the other gentleman that was here earlier praised the plows. I didn't praise the plows because they just left huge berms for people, made it hard for us to get out. We have a street light on our street that hasn't been active. I've been in my house for over 2 years now, and the city hasn't adopted the street. And that's part of phase 1. So if we're going to approve something more to be built in that general residential area, shouldn't we finish what we already started? Or shouldn't there be some caveat that says that this needs to be done? I pay over $4,000 a year in taxes and I get no services. And I think that's a shame. I can't rely on my road being plowed. There's no street lights. There's a lot of kids in our neighborhood that would benefit from that street light and just the completion of that project. So I worry that if you approve this project, then all the other stuff that needs to be done to finish phase 1 and even phase 2 so that people can safely navigate the area will get put off so that these buildings can be built. I also am worried about my property value. We have stunning views of the mountains, and now I'm looking at stunning views of a parking lot. What's that going to do for my property value? And shouldn't there be some sort of buffer that separates me from that sort of development? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Are there any members of the assembly that have questions for Mr. McDougall? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Has this been moved? Mr. Human, please.
Hello, my name is Mike Human. I live in the general vicinity of Smuggler's Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Human.
I just want to address you guys and set the record straight on some things. I guess we'll work our way backwards. On the street acceptance piece, we'd love to get it adopted too. Phase 1 has been complete for a while now, but due to the bureaucracy of the city government, we've not been able to get it accepted. They're now demanding that phase 2 be entirely complete before they'll go ahead and accept phase 1. So, I'd love to do it too, because I'm paying out of my own pocket to get the snow plowing done. And Dawn's actually absolutely correct. I do not have the equipment and capability to keep that street maintained. During that snowstorm, I had to personally drive my excavator up there and move the snow because the snow plow truck drivers that I hire can't move it anymore. So hopefully this happens this spring. That's the plan. But on phase 1 and phase 2 for that matter, in terms of getting the road accepted. So that concern, and then the other piece, as I recall, I've always said we're building a multi-family project down there, and that the roof line would be below the floor. which is the case. And in addition, if you guys look at my one permit that is approved so far for this project, the Army Corps Engineer wetlands permit includes a giant, vegetation burn, vegetated cover berm to shield the parking lot from the residents uphill. So, we've been very thoughtful about this. It's actually a design criteria that comes out of the city's, one of your guys' planning documents is where I got the idea. And the other thing I want to say about condos, and all this stuff, this project almost didn't happen. It almost was condos. And I want to thank the mayor and assembly members that lobbied successfully for us to sharpen our pencils and come back and do this. Obviously, we weren't going to build any $500,000 2-bedroom condos. I'd never attempt to do such a thing. But we were going to build like a kind of more senior-friendly condo project. And, that's probably what we would do if you guys didn't approve this money. We want to get housing units out here. Apartments don't pencil out. That's why no developers build them in this town. But with this money, you guys make it possible. You make it, it's the only way it's going to happen. And so I want to say, thank you guys for considering this. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Human. Are there any questions from the Assembly for Mr. Human? Thank you, Mr. Human, for your testimony. Now I will bring it back to the Assembly, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2023-14 BVB, an ordinance appropriating $2,250,000 to the manager for a loan to Chilkat Vistas LLC for Chilkat Vistas Apartments, funding provided by the Affordable Housing Fund. And ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and I'll be quick because I know everybody's getting tired. I'm objecting for a purpose of question. And first of all, I want to thank the humans, especially Mike, for really working hard on this. It almost fell apart, but they did sharpen their pencil very well. So I'm looking at page 68 of the packet, page 3 of 5 of the ordinance. And I'm not sure if this is for the city manager or the city attorney. Lines 6 through 8, the affordability section. Could you explain what that means?
Madam Manager, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. So there's basically two different affordability components in the proposal, the revised proposal that Chilkat Vistas submitted. And the first affordability component was that the rent would be $1,400 a month, adjusted for inflation annually for the term of the loan. This is the same language that we used in the prior ordinance for the Island Hills development. We, staff, was comfortable recommending that this satisfy the affordability component because 80% of Juneau area median income for the same unit is $1,712 per month. So arguably, the affordability standard that's established in the guidelines of the fund allows for higher rent capture. So the Chilkat Vistas proposed that 14 of their units would be at that threshold, and that the remainder of the units would be made available at 80% or less of Juneau area median income, which is consistent with guidelines in the Affordable Housing Fund. And just to clarify, the Affordable Housing Fund requires that 20% of the units are 80% below, at 80% AMI or below. So arguably, with the combination of the $1,400 units and the remainder of the units being below AMI, this is beyond the affordability requirements of the fund itself, in staff's opinion.
Madam Mayor, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for the clarification. That's why I wasn't sure if we were talking about total units or they were subsection of another, but that clarified it. Thanks.
Are there further questions?
Yeah, and I remove my objection.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will object just for purposes of maybe a statement. I believe the way the language is written, it's not saying that the other 31 units would be rented at $1,712 a month. It's just that that is 80% of AMI, so they would be rented at something under that, or up to, under or up to that. And I am seeing nods from the developers in the room. Thank you. Are there any other objections? Thank you. That ordinance is passed, and thank you, Mr. Human and Mr. Human. Moving on to item number 19 on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I'll also note that anyone following along the online agenda, this is actually item number 20 because we added the proclamation at the beginning for Engineers Week. So the paper agendas show it's item 19. This shows it's item 20 in the online agenda, but it is ordinance 2023-14, version BX, an ordinance transferring $800,000 from CIP F22-027 Juneau Police Department roof replacement to CIP P44-090 deferred building maintenance.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would transfer $800,000 from the Juneau Police Department roof replacement CIP to the deferred building maintenance CIP. The bid for the roof replacement project came in lower than anticipated. Ordinance 2023-14BG previously transferred funds from the deferred building maintenance CIP to the Juneau Police Department roof replacement CIP. This transfer would return excess project funding back to the deferred building maintenance CIP. The Juneau Police Department roof replacement CIP will retain sufficient funding for the project that is scheduled to begin construction in summer 2024. This transfer of project funding is consistent with the intent of the 2022 1% sales tax initiative approved by voters in the October 4, 2022 municipal election. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its meeting on January 9th, 2024. The Public Works and Facilities Committee will review this request. The Public Works and Facilities Committee reviewed this request at the January 29th, 2024 meeting. I recommend the Assembly adopt this ordinance.
Are there any members of the public that wish to testify on this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2023-14BX, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, and sorry, just for the purposes of a question, I did get some partial clarification from the city attorney over the weekend, but I am just, actually, no, maybe considering how late it is, I might take my question offline, so I'll remove my objection.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Are there any other objections? Seeing no objections, ordinance 2023-14BX has passed. Madam Manager, is there any unfinished business? Madam Manager, any new business? Any staff reports?
Nope.
We could go to Assembly reports, or seeing that it is very late, would the Assembly be interested in skipping Assembly reports? Does anyone object to that? Okay, Madam Mayor, do you object to skipping Assembly reports? No, you do not. Okay.
No, I just want to make one quick comment and then we can skip it. Community Health Needs Assessment Survey is on the website for anybody who wants to do a survey on the website about their community health needs, genosurvey.com. If you enter to win, there's a possible $500 prize. That's all I need to say, other than most of us will be in Southeast Conference tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Oh, yes.
Oh, Assembly comments and questions. Thank you, Ms. Cathcart. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. At HRC, we made some appointments. The committee unanimously moved to forward to the full Assembly for approval, and I move the appointment of Ethel Stokes to the Juneau Commission on Aging in the general public seat for a term beginning immediately and ending December 31st, 2025.
Are there
And I
any
ask for unanimous
objections?
consent. Oh, sorry.
Are there any objections? I see no objections.
Very good, thank you.
That appointment is made.
Very good. The committee also unanimously moved, and I move that the full assembly recommend to forward, I swear those are the words of the packet, to the state of Alaska Emergency Response Commission, the appointment of Nathan Rumsey, BRH seat 5A, for a term beginning immediately and ending December 31st, 2026, and the appointment of Stephen Carnazes, vulnerable population seat 11A, for a term beginning immediately and ending December 31st, 2025, on the local emergency planning committee, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objections, those appointments or those recommendations pass.
And one last one, sorry. We also forwarded to the full assembly, and I move the reappointment of Mila Cosgrove to the Personnel Board General seat for a term beginning immediately and ending January 31st, 2027. And I ask for unanimous consent.
So are there any objections? I see no objections. That appointment has been approved. Are there any other assembly comments and questions? Seeing none, we will move on to continuation of public participation on non-agenda items for the vast number of members of the public that are in the audience. There is no executive session. Our next meeting is a special meeting on the 26th of February, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, guys. See you later.